Hey BookTube, this is Samantha, and as you can see, we are in a different environment. My husband's currently going through his master's program, and he is working on homework in the office, which is where my bookshelves are. So we're gonna give this a try, see how this goes with the acoustics and everything. I can tell it's a little echoey to me, so we'll see how it turns out on video. Today I'm bringing you my March wrap-up, which it's a little bit of April wrap up too. I'll get to that later. But first of all, I want to start off with a little bit about my rating system and how I keep track of my reading. Well, first of all, I use the 5-star system, and 5 is usually a book that I will read multiple times over and over again. Usually these books are ones that I try to get on my shelf if they're not already on my shelf. 4 stars is I enjoyed reading the book. I had a good time with it, but probably only going to read it the one time. 3 stars means it was okay. Didn't necessarily enjoy it, but didn't hate it either. 2 stars means I very much disliked the book and would not like to see it ever again. And number 1 is like I want to burn and destroy the book and every copy that I see of it. That doesn't happen very often. I don't even know if I've ever given a 1-star review, to be honest. It's usually 2 stars or above. So just so you know, that's what my rating system usually is. Now, when it comes to keeping track of how I read, I currently have a system that I use in my bullet journal. If you want pictures, so you have something concrete to look at, if you want to use it yourself, feel free to let me know in the comments and I'll provide those pictures for you. But I'm just going to give you a brief overview right now of what it looks like. So for me, I use a 2-page spread. On this side, I have a list of the books that I've read for the month or at least started. And then down here is my time tracker. So I use the Bookly app and I keep track of how long I read for each book. So as you would see on Saturday, I read multiple books. I actually probably finished a book or 2 in there. So that's why there's so many different colors. And then on this side, I also keep track of the books I read, but I'm keeping track of the pages that I read per day. So I mark off how far I read for the day and then I put the day mark. If I don't finish the book, I'll just put DNF next to it. If I finish the book, I put my star review next to it, and we'll get to the books I talk about here. I use the squares. For you people who are familiar with the bullet journal, you know what I mean, but it's got the dotted grid. And the system I use for measuring pages is 50 pages per square, or if it's an audiobook, it's 30 minutes per square. So that's what I do to keep track of that. So overall, to go over my stats that I've kept track on there, is that I read 18 out of 31 days this month, which is better than it has been in the few months. I'm trying to read a little bit every day, no matter how short or how long it may be. It's a self-care routine for me. So more than half the month isn't that bad. I finished 7 books for the month of March, and I started one that I haven't completed yet. We'll get to that. The first book we're going to talk about is one that I actually started in February and only just recently finished in March. And it was actually like the very end of March too, so it just made the cut. And that is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. Now, I really loved Rebecca. It was the first book that I read by her. I absolutely fell in love with it, and when I knew that she had written more, I wanted to get my hands on it and figure out if I wanted to read more from her. This book is about a guy named Philip who was raised by a family member he sees as a father figure whose name was Ambrose. And Ambrose goes on this trip away from the house. Philip thinks nothing of it, but turns out that Ambrose runs into Philip's cousin Rachel. And apparently they hit it off, even though he was a self-declared bachelor, never to marry, and he gets married to Rachel. So Philip doesn't really know what to think of Rachel, doesn't necessarily like her even though they've never met. And then about 8-9 months after Rachel and Ambrose get married, Ambrose ends up dying. The doctors say that it's from a brain disease that runs through the family, but Ambrose sent some letters to Philip that might suggest otherwise. So soon after Ambrose's death, Philip is owning the house, and my cousin Rachel comes to visit. So that is the main plot of the book, is just trying to figure out, is Rachel guilty for killing Ambrose, or did he really die of a brain disease that caused him to think some delusions that weren't true? I enjoyed this book overall. When I had this in my hands, it was a really good read. I was very much enticed into what was happening. I couldn't really guess what was going to happen. I mean, you have your own opinions, but nothing was panning out the way I thought it would, in a good way. But when I put the book down, it was really hard for me to pick up because there's no action in it whatsoever. It's definitely a very slow progression. Kind of like Rebecca, but I feel like I was more invested in Rebecca than I was with this one. I don't know, I can't really tell you why. That perfect ending that Daphne du Maurier is so good at is also present in this book as well. So I actually gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Really enjoyed it, and I'd recommend it to anyone who also loved Rebecca. The next book that I'm going to be talking about is The Lost Hero, which is book 1 of the Heroes of Olympus series by Rick Riordan. This was a library book that I rented out, as my cousin Rachel also was. Now, in my April TBR video, I believe I mentioned that I had read it last month. No, I read it this month at the beginning. You know, it's been a while. It happens. But overall, really loved it. If you haven't seen my April TBR, just a very brief overview is that this new series is a little bit of a continuation of the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, but different main characters. The main characters from the first series seem to be interwoven into the second series, which I really enjoy. But for people who haven't read the first series, you have to read that first series first. That was a lot of firsts. Anyway, it's basically demigods who are the ones who are going to have to pull things together because the gods keep on fighting with each other, and the demigods are the ones who have to save the world. Really interesting. If you like action, if you like quick reads, these are the books to go with. Rick Riordan is very good at keeping you enticed in the story, having it be an easy read that's easy to follow, and then lots of action, and then the mystery kind of tied throughout. Highly recommend for anyone who's just trying to get their foot in the door but doesn't want something that's gonna be seriously complex like adult fantasy. Let's admit, sometimes that adult fantasy is a little hard to read, and as much as we love our adult fantasy, sometimes we just need that light read to pick up to get us through the day. I gave Lost Hero 5 stars because I would definitely reread it again. Next book we're going to talk about is an audiobook that I actually did. Now, I don't listen to audiobooks like at all. Like, it has to have a very, very strong, overwhelming review of being a great audiobook to listen to for me to actually like think about doing it, such as the Illuminae series. I've heard good things with Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. Heard that audiobook's really good, so like I jumped for those. And then I heard Sadie by Courtney Summers was really good, so I read that. If you want more in-depth thoughts about how I interacted with Sadie, or at least the story, I made an entire video talking about my experience with listening to the book, which I'll link up above on one side. Overall, it's a really good story. I was definitely caught into it. If you don't know anything about the book, it is mainly focused on these sisters, Maddie, who's 13, and Sadie, who is 19. At the very beginning of the book, it is discovered that Maddie was killed, and not too long after, Sadie goes missing. And so you're trying to figure out what exactly did happen to Maddie and where is Sadie? Is Sadie okay? What is she doing? It's a really great story to be read on audiobook because part of it's told in a podcast, and it feels like a podcast. It really does. The podcast journalist is trying to follow Sadie and figure out where she's going and why she's looking for this certain person. And then you've got Sadie's perspective as well. So you actually know what she's doing, you know her intentions and what she's thinking, what she's going through. I would not recommend for anyone who has a history or is triggered by sexual assault though. I learned that the hard way, and I highly recommend not reading it if it's a trigger for you. Just because, especially the audiobook, makes it very real. So I don't want anyone to be triggered or have a bad experience by reading this book. If that's not a trigger for you, go for it. It's very well done, very well written. I gave this book 4 stars out of 5, but that's my personal experience. The next book on my list is Slade House by David Mitchell. I don't have much of a relationship with David Mitchell whatsoever, but I heard that Slade House was a really good haunted house story, and it was pretty slim. I think it was only 230 some pages, so that's pretty short for me. Plus it was a really short book too. So when it was around Halloween time, I wanted to pick it up and read it really quick just to have that spooky spirit going on. But my library didn't have it available. So when I was browsing my shelves at the library recently and I saw it was on a shelf, I immediately picked it up. I read that book in 2 days. Like I said, it was a really quick read. I was actually thinking about not continuing with the book, and I actually talked about this book in my Top 5 Wednesday video, books that went from hate to love. So if you want a little bit more of my experience on this book, you can also check out that video as well. I don't really want to talk about the plot too much because it is a short book, and I feel like if I talked about the plot too much, it's gonna ruin the book. But it's a creepy house and some weird stuff's going on, and it's told in a way that is not your conventional haunted house story. It goes over long periods of time and it jumps so many years. So I'm gonna leave it at that. If you're into a creepy read, I would recommend it. Even for my friends who are not into horror, this is a really good book to read. It's not gonna give you nightmares. It'll give you that spooky factor, but it's not gonna keep you up at night. So if you're wanting to dip your toe into the horror genre, this is a really good book to use. I gave this book 4 stars out of 5. The next book on my list is a book that I don't think I would have heard of if it wasn't for another booktuber. I heard about this book from Literary Diversions, and that is Belonging by Nora Krug. I also did a video just dedicated to talking about this book because I loved it so much. I felt like it was really well told in the way that it was done, and her story is one that should be shared with everyone. It is about a woman who is of German descent, and her family was alive during World War II, like her parents and her grandparents. She moved to America, never really identified as being a German because of the huge stereotype around being a German, connected with Hitler, World War II, the Holocaust, all these negative connotations. She talks about her relationship with that, but then she decides to look back in her family history and actually learn what part her family had in World War II. It was very eye-opening, it was very touching. I love the way that was written. I could go on and on about it, but check out my video talking about the book because that's exactly what I did. I absolutely loved it, highly recommend it, and I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. Next book I'm going to be talking about is also another one that I started in February and then didn't finish until this month, and that is The Cabin at the End of the World. I picked this up because I was wanting to have a quick read. I was trying to get a little bit out of a reading slump. but I also wanted kind of a spooky story. So I just wanted to finish a book, and this one was pretty short. I think it was only, yeah, it was about 200 pages or so, 250. And I got through most of it in one sitting. I got through like 3/4 of it in one sitting, and then I stopped. And that was my mistake. If you pick up this book, do not stop where I stopped. Because what happened was the first like 3/4 of the book was just rolling and building and building and building and building. And like, I could not put the book down. Like, I was just so hooked, and the climax just kept on building and building on top of each other. And then like, I had stopped the book at like, I think it was like chapter 4. They're longer chapters, but it was like chapter 4. I'm not going to give any spoilers away, but that was basically where one really big climax part of the story that they were building up came to a stop. And then the rest of the book was the story tapering down and trying to wrap up. When I picked up the book again to finish it, I lost all that momentum that I had built up in the first half of it. So I think that really impacted my reading experience of this book, because so much time had passed. Because like I said, I started it in February, and then I didn't finish it until March. I do recommend reading this book. This is not for the faint of heart. Like, if you're my horror friends that like are not really into horror, don't read this one. It's got some gore in it, and it's definitely described in detail. I didn't have nightmares over it though, I'll say that, but like, if gore is not your thing, like, I probably wouldn't go near it. It made my stomach a little bit queasy, but I mean, I'm not really into gore that much either. I'm more psychological thriller, horror, that kind of scare. And again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the ending, I wish it went a different way. I think it would have matched the tone of the book if it had ended differently. Yeah. Kind of like with my Sadie review, I had said that I was having a hard time accepting the ending of Sadie, but it really couldn't have ended any other way. Like, it was ended properly. And then with this book, it was the other way around, where they gave us a certain ending and I wish they had not. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But overall, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. Honestly, if I had read it all in one go, it probably would have been 4.5 out of 5 stars, because legit, I had a hard time putting that book down. It was really good. Oh, didn't even talk about what the book was. Cabin at the End of the World is about this couple and their adopted daughter, who is I want to say she's like 9 or 11, but they're going to this cabin out in the middle of the woods or wherever, just to have some time alone, isolated. And the day that they get to the cabin, some strangers come up to their house and change their entire plan. Yeah, these strangers are definitely not bringing gifts. And the last book that I finished, it's a little bit of a cheat, because I actually just finished it tonight, and it's April 2nd. But I read legit like 95% of this book in March. So it's like, you know what? We're gonna say it's March. It's gonna be a March read, because I'm the one making this video. So, and that book is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. I saw everyone was like reading it, and everyone was wanting it. It took me forever to get this book from the library. I think it took me almost 2 months, because just everyone's wanting to read this book, and it's such a good book. And then you go to Goodreads, and it's got like 3.6 or something, 3.7. And so I was a little confused about why it took me so long to get this book if everyone's reading it. And after reading the book, I can understand why people would have problems with it. This book is about a woman who has decided that she's done dealing with life, and she's just going to sleep for an entire year. Just sleep. And the way that she does that is by taking medication. So I'm gonna say off the bat, the main character is not a likable character. You're not supposed to identify with her. And I think that is where the mixed reviews come in, is because some people read because they want to identify with the character, and then other people accept that you're not always going to like the main character, and that challenges the way you think. I feel like this was an unlikable character written well. I've read a book where it was an unlikable character and was not written well. I think it's a really interesting take on how people think of grief and how people deal with grief. Not necessarily like taking medication every day to keep themselves asleep, but you know, people do fall into depressions when people die, and people fall into depressions for absolutely no reason. And I feel like I saw some reflection of that in an abstract way. Like if you just took the pills out, it was a really interesting take. I have a bachelor's in psychology and I work in the mental health field. So that's how I approached this book, with that mentality in mind. And I think that improved my reading experience of it. She does get prescribed medication from this really wacko doctor who just takes her word for everything and just prescribes her everything under the sun. And realistically, that just wouldn't happen. There's measures put in place where you cannot just prescribe the same person 6 different medications of differing strength for the same thing. It's not possible. But I know that. I know that's not realistic. So I think putting that to the side and just looking at it in an abstract way of why is she wanting to sleep for a whole entire year, and what's her motivation to do this, and how does she treat people, and how does she view her life, was really interesting. If there's anyone who's wanting to maybe change their way of how they think on life and how people deal with life, I recommend this book. The ending of it, like the last, actually like the part that I read tonight, about half of it was a little, as my family would put it, like too artsy fartsy for me. A lot of that philosophical talk, but it's only for a few pages. So I'm like, you know, I can handle it for a few pages. I'm not going to say anything specifically, but there is this one certain thing that trends throughout the book, and based off of what that thing is, you can kind of tell what's going to happen at the end. I'm just going to leave it at that because I don't want to spoil anything. I almost want to like have my own video talk about this. Let me know if that's something you're interested down below, like an actual spoilery review of this, because honestly, I have a lot of thoughts on this. Overall, honestly, I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I actually really enjoyed it. So those were the books that I have finished. Now, there was one book that I did not finish, but I did start in the month of March, and that is Circe by Madeline Miller. When it comes to Circe, it's an easy read. Kind of like Lost Hero. Like it's easy for my brain to take in the information that is being told to me, and I can follow the story really well. I think what's keeping me from picking up the book and actually finishing it is that I have no idea what's going to happen, because there's been no overarching thread to kind of want me to keep reading to figure out what happens, if that makes sense. It's more of just kind of like story, 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 story. And I was like, well, where is it going? I don't know. I mean, like, I know very generally about the story of Circe, and I'm wondering if that's what it's leading up to. But then, like, then what? So I think that's where my problem is. I don't know where the book is going, and there's nothing going throughout the story to make me think, oh, I wonder what happens with this. There's no mystery at all. It's just her living her life. And this is what happens. I'm about halfway through right now. I'm not necessarily at DNF point with the book. I don't know where the book's going. So if you've read Circe, can you kind of put some comments below on whether it's worth finishing or not? Because if it's not, I can easily DNF it. For you guys who saw my April TBR, I've got enough books on my plate. You know, I have no problem with DNFing a book. It's easy enough to read, so like if it is going to be worth it to read, you know, I'll pick it up. But if it's not going to be worth it, I don't want to waste my time. So that's where I'm at with Circe. That is my March wrap up. Make sure that you check in later in the week because I will be posting a vlog on my Dewey's 24-hour readathon progress. It'll be my first vlog, so we'll see how that goes, but I'm definitely going to keep you guys updated on what I'm reading and make sure that you are also checking in on Goodreads and Twitter on my reading progress because I keep that up to date daily. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if any of these books that I read this month sound interesting to you. I'll talk to you in the comments. Have a good day and see you later.